so I had a lot of debate on where to start this sermon. But I'm going to tell you about the historical context of Second Temple Israel, and go into the meanings of names like Joseph and Mary. I'm going to tell you about my own upbringing, my own struggle with the Christian story, with Christmas in general. But I want to start in two places instead. I'm going to start with me as a little child, when I got to come up for the Christmas story at First United Methodist Church in Lubbock, Texas. And it was Advent time. It was the season before Christmas. And at First United Methodist Church in Lubbock, Texas, my kindergarten class had a craft fair where all the grades got to do crafts. And kindergartners needed, a simple craft. So our task was to make baby Jesus in the manger. It's very simple. They gave us some popsicle sticks that we glued together in a square. And they gave us some cotton, and they gave us a little clay ball to roll into the head. And then you put a little halo on it, made out of pipe cleaner. Very straightforward. My mother, Frankie B., walked into the chancel area of First United Methodist Church in Lubbock, Texas, and found the table marked kindergartners that was strewn with baby Jesuses in the manger. Plenty of similar-looking ones, more or less the same, some with the halo a little crooked, some with googly eyes or faces printed in marker. But there was one that stood out. There was one that was more or less a baby Jesus in a manger. The popsicle sticks were more or less straight. There was cotton inside of it. The ball was more or less round for the head. And it had a face drawn on it. But there was also a clay body underneath it that is doused in red paint or marker or crayon, covered in red. And my mom looked at it, checked the name underneath it, and it said McKinley Sims. And she said, "Now, McKinley, why is baby Jesus covered in red?" And without missing a beat, she says, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "That's where he got attacked by the tiger." For those of us who are not familiar with the nativity story, there are no tigers. There are, however, a lot of tigers in the movie The Jungle Book, which I was very familiar with. And so a wire got crossed somewhere between baby Mowgli and baby Jesus. So my really bloody and kind of ugly baby Jesus. In actuality, though, I think there's something true in that maybe we miss in the Christmas story. Right? We talk about, oh, come let us adore him. The wise men come see the baby laid in the cloths and in the manger, and it's nice and it's pretty. And I wonder if that misses something. So my very first ministry experience when I was in seminary was here in Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And when I walked in, I told my supervisor that I was really looking forward to being a chaplain and being a minister. She said, "Okay, well, tell me two things that scare you." And I said, "Easy, cancer and babies." The next day, I started work in pediatric oncology and the neonatal intensive care unit. And it was wonderfully challenging, and it was incredibly human. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done is working there, because I was a young man, didn't have kids of my own, and walking into the NICU every day to see moms and dads and kids struggling. That's real life. That's the real nativity story. So when I look back and I read our Christmas story, I love the carols and I love the hymns. And I love the idea of baby Jesus in the manger. But I think maybe I had it right at First United Methodist Church in Lubbock, Texas. That maybe the Jesus that's real, it's bloody, it's screaming, it's crying. Maybe that's the real heart of the story. So I wanted us to think about that a little bit today as we meditate on this story. What it means for us to talk about Christmas, to celebrate Christmas. We spoke a few weeks ago about Mary being the young unwed mother who doesn't have any choices, who accepts this weighty destiny, what it must have been like. We could also talk about Joseph, the day laborer and stonemason, who it says is from a town called Bethlehem, a small town, but he's living in a town far away called Nazareth. So the thing about the town of Nazareth is that in those days there was no town at all. The nearest town was a Roman town called Sepphoris, where the Romans lived. Joseph was not a Roman. Joseph was a Jewish day laborer. So he would have lived with the other Jewish day laborers in the mud, in the desert, in the town called Nazareth. So we can talk about what it was like to live in this land with a dominant military superpower who's oppressing people like you, and then to be told that you have to go somewhere else to have your baby. Having a baby now is challenging enough. Can you imagine having a baby back then with no health care, to be told that you have to leave the town where you have some kind of support network to go to another town to find that there is no room at the inn, they say. That's the story we get. If you, like me, attended a Christian church growing up, you might have heard the Sunday school story that there's no room at the inn. There was the no vacancy sign at the Bethlehem Hotel. Well, folks, I got news for you. Not a lot of electric signs back in those days, and not a lot of wood either to build wooden buildings of multiple stories. To build something like an inn, you would not have built it out of wood. You would have used what was already there in Bethlehem, in the desert, in Palestine, which is caves. So if you were a rich person, you had caves. So when they say there's no room at the inn, they mean there's no room in the good rooms of the caves. There's room in the lower levels of the caves where the animals are kept. So imagine being inside a cave underneath the ground with the animals. The baby Jesus covered in blood starts to feel a little more real, right? So I love talking about this stuff. I love the historicity of it. I love thinking about what it was like to be there, to see the totally human aspect in this story that is so easy to miss. When we sing songs about glory to God in the highest and how everything is perfect and Jesus is the light of the world, when there's a baby covered in blood in the cave with the animals. I want to zoom in on that little baby. Think about where we see that baby today, in the manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes. Because, friends, I believe that is the real miracle of Christmas. Having spent time in the NICU, having spent time in the children's hospital, I remember what it was like to live vicariously when my partner's brother and sister got pregnant that summer. It was going to be a nephew. And that's great. But I was spending all my time with sick children. And all I could think about was the baby healthy? Is mom healthy? Is everyone okay? And our nephew was born and he's our godson and he's fine. But that's not the reality for everyone. So the fact that this baby is born, bloody and screaming, surrounded by the animals in the bottom of a cave, that is a miracle. That is the miracle of life, of birth, of humanity. So now we're talking about the kings, the wise men with the beards who come, and they bring these gifts that they have traversed afar with. Christian tradition says that they have names, 3 of them, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. Granted, that is not in the text anywhere that there are actually 3 of them, nor are they named, but I guess they thought there were 3 because they bring 3 gifts. And it'd be really awkward to be the king that showed up without a gift. I would imagine. I like this idea of 3 wise men coming from a different place, presumably from a different country. Maybe they're of different religious backgrounds. But they all have the same experience of this star in the sky. They say, this light is drawing me on. I gotta check it out. They hear tell of a king being born. And it's like what we talked about with the kids. They hear tell of this king being born, and they go and they follow the light to the king, and it's in the last place they expect. It's not the castle. It's not the palace. It's in the cave. with the animals and the bloody, screaming baby, the miracle of birth. What must it have been like to be on this journey and to find something that's the least and the last thing you expected? And then to think, they told us this was the Son of God. We're not in a temple. We're not in a holy place. We're in a cave. I find that really interesting. That the same mystery that pulls them on and demands that they search diligently brings them to the last place they expect, and in the tiny baby, surrounded by the animals, who is called Emmanuel. God is with us. God is here in the cave with the animals. I had a lot of problems with this story when I was growing up. And I think a lot of the problems that I had were really about some of the theology behind it, right? Because it's a lot to ask of people to believe. So I looked for all the untruths in the story. Right? There's problems with the date of Jesus' birth. Who was actually in charge at the time? What's the deal with the star? Is that a supernova? Is it like a UFO in the sky? What are we dealing with here? So I was looking for all the untruths in the story because I didn't really want to wrestle with the truth that was there. Right? So when I was in high school, college, I tried to run away from the story. I tried to run away from the baby in the cave because of the Christ stuff around it. I couldn't handle that. I couldn't deal with it. So I ran away from that confusion. And then I went to seminary. Kind of a long story. But I found myself in the NICU at CHOP. And I was working with families who lost kids, who were worried they were going to lose their kids. And I wanted to run away from the baby in the cave even more. I wanted to abandon all of that. I didn't want to believe in the story of the Garden of Eden. I didn't want to believe in sin. I didn't want to believe that I was a sinner, that I was evil. I didn't want to believe that I was inherently depraved, that I needed the intercession of the baby in the cave, that I needed the intercession of Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, which, like the 3 wise men, is not actually in the Bible, but that's also another story. But the more I ran from the stuff around it, the more I was drawn back to the baby in the cave. The mythology and the superstition around it were the stuff that I was wrestling with. I specifically didn't like the word Christ. It's kind of hard to get around Christmas, because it's kind of half the word. So I had to do a little research. All right, and Christ is an English word that we get from Christos, which is a Greek word, that we get from Meshiach, a Hebrew word. The idea that means the anointed one. So if you didn't know this, Jesus, not the only anointed Meshiach, Messiah, in the scriptures. In fact, that word is used no less than 37 times for people like Zedekiah. Anybody ever heard of Zedekiah Christ? No? Hezekiah, another great king. He's a good one. No, Hezekiah Christ. Samuel, a priest. David, King David fame. David and Goliath. Some dude named Eliab. Even in Jesus' time, people claiming to be the Messiah, to be anointed ones of God, Meshiachs, they showed up fairly often. And they were usually trying to foment some revolution against the Romans. And they all have one thing in common. None of them do it. They were all executed by the Roman government. So the idea that this little baby in the cave could be a Meshiach, a king, an anointed one, that's probably not that surprising to people. They've heard that story before. But till you get to the Gospel of John, we read from the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. They're the ones that talk the most about the birth. Their details don't really line up. That's okay, I guess. There's this great Venn diagram that I saw that has 3 circles. One says Gospel of Luke, one says Gospel of Matthew, and the third says Standard Nativity Play. And that's kind of what all they have in common. Like in the middle, there's the angels, and you'll call him Jesus, and I forget the third thing. But only thing in Luke is that who gets, it's Joseph, and in Matthew it's Mary, and in the nativity play there's donkeys. There's no donkeys anywhere else. It's a long story. But the funny thing about this diagram is there's 3 interlocking circles, and then there's another circle over here that says Gospel of John. And what's in the Gospel of John? It says weird theology about light and words and stuff, question mark. So if you're not familiar, the Gospel of John talks about in the beginning, echoing the words of Genesis. And it's wild. If you read the Gospel of John, literally, it makes no sense. But it's theology, it's poetry, right? And the Gospel of John starts out, in the beginning was the Word. The Word, capital W. The Logos. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and all things came into being through the Word. Okay, thanks, John. Like, what are we doing here? The Celtic tradition, of which I'm very fond, they took some liberties with this. They said, well, it's not just the Word, but it's also the sound. In the beginning was the sound. Which, if you know something about Eastern religions, the idea of a sound at the creation of the universe, the Om sound, there's a parallel there. Okay? So John Scribus Erigena was a writer who said, no, in the beginning was the sound. And all things came into being through that sound. The stars in the sky came into being from the sound. The animals, the birds of the air, us, we came into being through the sound, but we are all echoes of that sound. He calls it that Christ sound. I said, whoa, there's that word again. Are we talking about the person, or are we talking about this thing? He said, no. It's this thing. It's the sound, it's the word, it's this light that was present, that's in everything. Everything. You, me, the baby in the cave. John Philip Newell, part of the Celtic tradition, says this: Jesus was not only the Son of God, not only the Son of Man, a title that means human being. It says, at the birth of every child, the holy is born. The deepest and most hidden of truths is that we are what the Christ is, born of divine light and humanity, and every creature is of the light that was in the beginning. Amen. We can do that here, that's fine. The idea that we might be endowed with that light, the star that leads people on, the light that is inside us, walking in that light. To put the Christ back in Christmas is to see ourselves in the story of the Holy Family and the baby in the cave, to see others who might be laid in the manger too. The babies at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the babies who are being carried from Central and South America to our southern border to be stopped, to be told there is no room at the inn. Amen. Don't leave here, friends, and take the news back to Herod that you found the light. The system that distorts and looks down on the faith and the origin of others, don't go back there, the story tells us. Go back by your own road. You have followed the light, followed the star, found it within you too. That the baby that was born human and bloody in the cave, in the lowest of circumstances, in the last place you would expect, is nevertheless a bearer of that light. Friends, to paraphrase poet William Blake, buckle your seatbelts for this one. Jesus Christ is the one true child of God. And so am I. And so are you. Jesus is the light of the world, Christians proclaim. So are you. So am I. You are an echo of the Christ sound that created the universe, sprang forth into the stars, into the planets, into the galaxy. The same secret light that is in the mystery of the star in the sky is in the middle of the baby in the cave. So, that knowledge this Christmas, how will you change the world with your light, Christ bearer? Will you feed the hungry? Will you shelter the homeless? Will you sponsor the immigrant? Will you welcome the wise men with the beards from a different religion than your own? Will you follow the star, even if it leads you to the last place you'd expect? To follow the echoes of that Christ word sound light that echoes in your soul and is intertwined with a royal beauty bright. Knowing that the divine love that flows through you, within you, and out of you, as a child of God, that's what the Christmas story tells us. And that's the mystery of what matters most, I think. Christmas Eve. How will you shine your light? May that be so. Amen. Sometimes when I get done, I need to sing a little bit to work out my nerves. So before we hear some hymns, I just need a little love and support here. This is a famous song that everybody knows. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Friends, the light that was in the cave, the animals, and the Jesus covered in blood is the same light that shines within you and within me. May we shine it always, especially where it's needed most. Amen.